"Excuse me, ma'am. Do you work here?" The question came softly, but the tone was confident. A woman stood near the shoe aisle, holding a pair of expensive heels. She was dressed in a simple pair of jeans and a navy blue sweater, her natural curls framing her face. The employee, a tall man with neatly combed brown hair, barely glanced at her. He continued folding shirts on the display table, ignoring her. She cleared her throat. "I'd like some help, please." The man sighed heavily. He turned, looking her up and down. His eyes lingered on her simple outfit before rolling in frustration. "Yeah, I'm busy," he said flatly. The woman frowned. "It looks like you're just folding shirts. And you look like you can go find someone else," he shot back with a smirk. Her fingers curled into fists. "This is terrible customer service. I'd like to speak to your manager." He snorted. "Lady, we don't just call the manager for every customer who has a bad day. Maybe try shopping somewhere else if you can't handle it." For a moment, she stood frozen, stunned by his rudeness. Then, she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and leaned in slightly. "You don't recognize me, do you?" The man scoffed. "Why? Are you famous or something?" She smiled, but it wasn't a friendly one. "You could say that," she said coolly. Then, she pulled out her phone, tapped a few buttons, and turned the screen toward him. His smirk faded. His face went pale. Because there, on the store's official website, was her photo, her name written in bold beneath it. Alyssa Grant, founder and CEO of Grant Lux. The same store he was working in. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You're the... Yes, she cut him off. And I'd love to know why one of my employees just refused to help me in my own store. The silence was heavy, but inside, Alyssa's mind was racing. How many other employees treated customers like this? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, what was she going to do about it? Alyssa hadn't planned for this to happen. She had walked into the store undercover, wearing nothing that screamed. She wasn't the type to show off, even though she owned one of the most luxurious retail chains in the country. She wanted to see her store through the eyes of a regular customer, to feel what they felt. For months, she had received complaints, some subtle, some direct. Customers had written emails about rude employees, about how some people were ignored while others got excellent service. But numbers on a screen weren't enough. Alyssa needed to see it for herself. So, she had driven to this specific store, one of her biggest locations in New York City. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. She had walked in like any regular shopper, excited to see how her employees treated the people who walked through the doors. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected a rude, lazy employee. She hadn't expected to be brushed off like she was nothing. And most of all, she hadn't expected the anger bubbling inside her as she stared at the man struggling to find his words. I didn't know," he stammered. "That I was the CEO?" Alyssa asked, raising an eyebrow. He nodded quickly. "Yeah. If I had known, I would have." "Would have what?" Her voice was sharp. "Helped me? Because I had money? Because I had power?" He swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his forehead. Alyssa's gaze didn't waver. "What do you do when it's someone who doesn't look important? Someone who doesn't look rich?" His silence was all the answer she needed. The heat in her chest grew. This wasn't just about her. This was about every customer who had ever been treated this way. She had built Grant Lux from the ground up, making sure it was a store where everyone felt valued. And yet, right in front of her, was proof that something was very, very wrong. She turned, her eyes scanning the store. Other employees were watching now, whispering among themselves. Some looked worried. Others quickly turned away, pretending to be busy. Alyssa took a deep breath. This was only the beginning. She had work to do. But first, she had a message to send. She looked back at the man, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Get your manager," she said. "Now." His hands shook slightly as he scrambled away, nearly knocking over a display rack. As she watched him disappear into the back, her phone vibrated in her hand. She glanced at the screen. A message from her assistant, "Janelle, we have a problem. Call me at..." Alyssa exhaled slowly, gripping her phone tighter. One crisis at a time. But something told her this was just the beginning. Alyssa's heart was still racing when she stepped aside, watching the employee disappear behind the swinging door labeled Employees Only. She could feel the eyes on her. The other employees sneaking glances, the customers pretending not to listen. Some had caught on. Others had no idea that the woman in jeans and a sweater was the very person whose name hung outside the building. She took a steadying breath and glanced down at her phone again. Janelle's message burned in her mind. "We have a problem. Call me at..." Alyssa hesitated. She wanted to deal with this mess before handling whatever was waiting for her on the other end of that call. But her gut told her something wasn't right. She stepped toward a quieter aisle, hit Janelle's number, and put the phone to her ear. It rang twice before Janelle answered. "Alyssa, thank God you called." "Janelle, what's wrong? You're at the store, right?" Alyssa frowned. "Yeah, why?" A pause. Then, in a much lower voice, Janelle said, "I just got word that someone tipped off the press. A reporter knows you're there." Alyssa's stomach dropped. "What?" "I don't know how, but I have sources telling me a journalist is already on their way. And listen, this isn't just any journalist. It's Ethan Royce." Alyssa closed her eyes and pinched the bridge of her nose. Of course, it had to be him. Ethan Royce wasn't just any journalist. He was the journalist. Known for his brutal, tell-all stories and his ability to dig up dirt on anyone, Ethan never left without a scandal. And now he was coming here? Her blood ran cold. "Janelle," she said carefully, "how much does he know?" "Not sure. But if I had to guess, enough to make this a PR nightmare." Alyssa clenched her jaw. First, she gets treated terribly in her own store. Now, a journalist was on his way to catch whatever disaster might unfold next. This was spiraling too fast. Janelle's voice came through again. "Alyssa, you need to get out of there." Alyssa looked around. People were moving about, shopping, chatting. The employees had stopped whispering and were pretending to be busy. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't. She had come here to see the truth, and she had seen it. But now, the truth might burn everything down. "I can't leave," she said finally. Janelle made a frustrated noise. "Alyssa, I need to see this through. I can't run just because a reporter might twist the story. You don't know what he's going to do, and I don't care." Silence. Then, Janelle exhaled. "All right, but if things get out of control, I want you out." "Got it." Alyssa didn't answer, because at that exact moment, the employee returned, and behind him was the store manager. Alyssa's body stiffened as she watched them approach. The employee looked uneasy, his steps slower than before. The manager, on the other hand, had a firm stride, her face unreadable. Janelle's voice cut through the tension. "Alyssa?" "I have to go," Alyssa muttered. "Alyssa, wait." She ended the call and tucked her phone into her pocket just as the manager came to a stop in front of her. A middle-aged woman with auburn hair pulled into a sleek bun. She had a sharp, no-nonsense look about her. Her name tag read Rachel Porter, store manager. Rachel folded her arms. "My employee tells me we have a situation." Alyssa studied her face. There was no sign of recognition. Either Rachel hadn't been paying attention to corporate meetings, or she just wasn't expecting the CEO to walk in unannounced. Alyssa tilted her head. "Yes, we do. Your employee refused to help me. Twice." Rachel sighed. She turned to the employee. "Jeremy, is that true?" Jeremy, the rude employee, looked at the floor. I didn't know who she was." "That's not the point," Alyssa said, her tone clipped. "Does it matter who I am? Would you have treated someone else the same way?" Jeremy had nothing to say. Rachel let out another sigh. "Ma'am, I apologize for any mistreatment you experienced. This is not how we operate at Grant Lux." Alyssa crossed her arms. "You're right. It's not. Or at least, it's not how it should be." Rachel shifted on her feet. It was clear she was uncomfortable. She still didn't seem to recognize Alyssa, which told her all she needed to know. Rachel wasn't paying attention to the corporate structure. "Interesting." Rachel cleared her throat. "Is there anything I can do to make this right?" Alyssa hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "Actually," she said, unlocking the screen, "I want to show you something." She turned the phone around, just as she had done with Jeremy earlier. Rachel squinted at the screen. Then, her face changed. She froze. Her eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. Alyssa watched realization hit her like a freight train. "Why you?" Rachel whispered. "You're—" "Yes," Alyssa said, her voice cool. "I'm Alyssa Grant. The founder. The owner. Your boss." Rachel's face turned white. Behind her, Jeremy made a choking sound. The store was dead silent now. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. She looked like she wanted to disappear. Alyssa tapped her phone off and slid it back into her pocket. "Now," she said, her voice dangerously calm, "would you like to tell me exactly how long this kind of treatment has been going on in my store?" Rachel visibly swallowed. And that was when the front doors swung open with force, and Ethan Royce walked in. His sharp brown eyes immediately locked onto her. And just like that, Alyssa knew. This was about to become a very, very big problem. The moment Ethan Royce stepped into the store, Alyssa's stomach tightened. Dressed in a crisp black blazer over a dark gray shirt, the journalist carried himself with the confidence of someone who always got what he wanted. His brown eyes scanned the store like a predator assessing its prey, and when his gaze finally landed on her, he smirked. That smirk told her everything. He knew. He knew who she was. He knew what had happened. And worse, he knew this was going to be a story. The silence in the store was suffocating. Employees stiffened, customers glanced around, and Rachel Porter, the store manager, looked ready to faint. Jeremy, the rude employee, had completely paled, shifting uncomfortably on his feet. Alyssa forced herself to breathe. She wasn't about to let Ethan Royce control the narrative. Not today. Ethan took slow, casual steps forward, his hands tucked in his pockets. When he was close enough, he tilted his head. Well, he mused. "Alyssa Grant. Fancy meeting you here." Alyssa crossed her arms. "Ethan, imagine my surprise when I get a tip," he continued, that the Alyssa Grant, the powerful, elusive CEO of Grant Lux, was spotted shopping in her own store. Alone, unannounced. His smirk widened. "Not exactly your usual scene, is it?" Alyssa kept her face neutral. "Maybe I just wanted to buy a pair of shoes." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "I'd believe that if you hadn't just called out one of your employees for being terrible at his job." Rachel visibly tensed. Jeremy winced. Alyssa, however, didn't flinch. "If I did, then it's my right. It's my store." Ethan's eyes gleamed. "Oh, I don't disagree. In fact, I think it's quite the story." Alyssa's jaw tightened. "There is no story." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "No." He glanced around the store dramatically. "So, the CEO of Grant Lux secretly goes undercover, gets treated like garbage by one of her own employees, and then reveals her identity in front of everyone? Sounds like a headline to me." Rachel shifted beside her, stepping in quickly. "Mr. Royce, this is just a misunderstanding." Ethan held up a hand. "Oh, I'd love to hear your version of events." He turned to Alyssa. "Because from where I'm standing, this looks like a major scandal." The way he said it made Alyssa's blood boil. She knew what he was doing, twisting the truth. If she let him run with this, the headlines would read, "Undercover CEO humiliates store employee in shocking confrontation." Or worse, Grant Lux's CEO secretly tests employees, and the results are disastrous. She couldn't let him control the narrative. Alyssa took a step closer, meeting his gaze head-on. "You're assuming the worst." Ethan smirked. "It's my job." "No," she corrected, "it's your job to find the truth. And the truth is, I didn't come here to test anyone. I came to see how my store actually runs. And what I saw was unacceptable." Rachel flinched. Jeremy looked down at his shoes. Ethan's smirk faltered, but only for a second. "So, you admit the customer service in your stores is bad?" Alyssa didn't hesitate. "I admit that something is wrong, and I intend to fix it." A flicker of interest crossed Ethan's face. "And how exactly do you plan to do that?" Alyssa's mind was racing. She had only just begun to see the cracks in her company. She had no plan yet, only a determination to fix what was broken. But then, a new idea sparked. Something bold. Something that could change everything. Alyssa squared her shoulders. "I'll be staying." Rachel snapped her head toward her. Excuse me? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Oh, I'm going to stay in this store, Alyssa announced. I want to see how it's run. Not just for an hour, not for a day, but long enough to understand exactly what's happening behind the scenes. Rachel looked horrified. Jeremy went stiff. Ethan? He just looked amused. Now that is interesting, Ethan mused. The CEO of Grant Lux, working in one of her own stores. That's a story. Alyssa met his gaze. It's not for the story. It's for my business. For my customers. If there's a problem, I want to fix it from the inside. Ethan studied her for a moment, as if assessing whether or not she was serious. Then, to her surprise, he grinned. Well, Alyssa, he said, I think I just found my next exclusive. Alyssa felt the floor shift beneath her. This was not what she had intended. She opened her mouth to argue. But before she could, the front doors burst open again. A security guard hurried inside, his face tense. Behind him, a woman in a bright red suit marched in with purpose, her heels clicking sharply against the tile. Alyssa recognized her instantly. Victoria Langston, chairwoman of the board, and the most powerful person in the company besides Alyssa herself. Rachel visibly paled. Ethan's eyebrows lifted in genuine surprise. Victoria's cold blue eyes landed on Alyssa. And then, she spoke. Alyssa, she said, voice sharp as a knife. We need to talk. Now. Alyssa's stomach dropped. She knew that tone. Something was very, very wrong. The store felt like it had gone silent. Victoria Langston's sharp gaze pierced through Alyssa like a dagger. Dressed in a striking red suit that fit her tall, lean frame perfectly, Victoria wasn't just intimidating. She was ruthless. And she was here, unannounced, which meant something was very, very wrong. Alyssa straightened her back, keeping her face unreadable. Victoria, she greeted, her voice even. Victoria's lips pressed together. Office. Now. Rachel visibly stiffened. Jeremy took a step back. Even Ethan Royce, who had been relishing this unfolding disaster, looked intrigued. But Alyssa? She wasn't afraid of Victoria Langston. If there was a problem, she was going to face it head-on. She gave a single nod and turned, walking toward the back of the store where the manager's office was located. Victoria's heels clicked sharply as she followed. The moment the office door slammed shut behind them, Victoria didn't waste a second. What the hell are you doing, Alyssa? Alyssa folded her arms. Good to see you too. Victoria's eyes flashed. Don't play games with me. Do you have any idea what kind of mess you're creating? Alyssa met her gaze, refusing to back down. If by mess, you mean me realizing there's a serious problem in our stores, then yes, I do. Victoria scoffed. We don't have a problem. Alyssa let out a short laugh. Really? Because I just walked into my own store and was completely ignored. Twice. Victoria's expression didn't change. You shouldn't have been there in the first place. Alyssa's jaw clenched. Excuse me? Victoria stepped closer. A CEO doesn't walk into a store like some mystery shopper, Alyssa. We have district managers, regional supervisors, entire teams to handle things like this. Your job is to run the company, not play undercover boss. Alyssa took a slow breath. And what if those managers aren't doing their jobs? Victoria's gaze darkened. For the first time, Alyssa saw it. The flicker of hesitation. She hit a nerve. Alyssa's eyes narrowed. You knew. Victoria didn't react. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do, Alyssa pressed. You knew there were problems in our stores. How long have you known, Victoria? Victoria exhaled slowly. Then, she leaned against the desk, crossing her arms. Look, she said, her voice measured. You're smart, Alyssa, and I respect that. But you have to understand, this is business. There are always complaints, always bad employees, always a few bad experiences. It happens in every retail chain. Alyssa's fingers curled into fists. That's not an excuse. It's reality. Alyssa shook her head. You're missing the point. This isn't just about a few bad employees. It's about the way we treat our customers. It's about the company culture. If we allow this behavior to continue, it becomes who we are. Victoria's expression hardened. And what exactly do you plan to do? Fire a few employees? Make an announcement? Alyssa, these problems don't just disappear overnight. Alyssa met her gaze head-on. No, they don't. Which is why I'm staying. Victoria's jaw tightened. What? Alyssa squared her shoulders. I'm staying in this store. I'm going to see firsthand how things run, how employees treat customers, and where the problems start. Victoria stared at her for a long moment. Then, she let out a short laugh. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. Victoria shook her head. Alyssa, you have a company to run, and this is part of running it. Victoria's eyes flashed with frustration. You're the CEO, not a store associate. For now. Alyssa tilted her head. Maybe I'll be both. Silence. A long, tense silence. Then, Victoria spoke, her voice low. The board won't like this. Alyssa's stomach twisted, but she refused to show any sign of weakness. The board doesn't make day-to-day decisions. I do. Victoria stepped forward. And what if this blows up in your face? What if the press turns this into a circus? What if customers lose trust in us? Alyssa stared her down. What if they already have? Victoria froze. And just like that, Alyssa saw the truth. The board wasn't unaware. They had simply chosen to ignore the problem. For the first time since this conversation started, Victoria's voice softened. You're making a risky move. Alyssa nodded. I know. Victoria studied her carefully. Then, she sighed, rubbing her temples. Fine, she muttered. You want to do this? Do it. But don't expect me to save you when this gets out of control. Alyssa smirked. I wasn't planning to. Victoria sighed again, then walked toward the door. But before she opened it, she turned back. You better hope this works, Alyssa. With that, she disappeared. Alyssa let out a slow breath, her heart still racing. She knew what she was getting into. She knew the risks. But she also knew one thing for certain. She wasn't backing down. Just as she steadied herself, the doors swung open again. This time, it was Rachel, looking panicked. Alyssa, she said quickly, you need to get out here. Now. Alyssa frowned. What is it? Rachel's face was pale. It's Jeremy, she said, breathless. He's gone. Alyssa froze. What? Rachel swallowed hard. He ran. He just left the store. And I think he took something with him. Alyssa's pulse spiked. She stepped forward. What did he take? Rachel hesitated, and then, in a small voice, she said, the safe deposit codes. Alyssa's blood turned to ice. Oh, hell no. This just went from bad to worse. Alyssa's heart pounded. She stared at Rachel, trying to process the words. Jeremy took the safe deposit codes? Her mind raced. How? Why? Was this planned? What was he trying to do? She didn't have time to think. Where's the safe? She demanded. Rachel swallowed hard. In the back office. It's where we keep our highest value inventory. Limited edition bags, luxury watches, rare designer pieces. Alyssa's stomach dropped. If Jeremy had those codes, he could clean out the safe and be gone before anyone even realized what had happened. And worse? If this got out, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be a security breach. A complete disaster. Alyssa moved. She stormed out of the office, Rachel close behind. The store was still buzzing with customers, completely unaware of what was happening behind the scenes. Employees looked up as she passed, confusion written all over their faces. She didn't stop. She marched straight to the back room, where the store's security office was located. A guard stood by the door. Alyssa barely slowed down. I need to see the security footage. Now. The guard blinked. Ma'am, Rachel stepped in. This is Alyssa Grant, the CO. The man stiffened. Then, without another word, he opened the door and let them in. The security room was small, but packed with screens showing every angle of the store. A second guard sat at the monitors, scanning the live footage. Alyssa didn't waste a second. Rewind the last 10 minutes. Find Jeremy. The guard quickly pulled up the footage. The screen flickered, then showed Jeremy near the back office. Alyssa's eyes narrowed. He was looking around nervously. Then, as soon as the coast was clear, he slipped inside. Rachel sucked in a breath. The footage showed Jeremy at the desk, rummaging through papers. Then, He found the codes. Alyssa's jaw tightened as she watched him hastily type them into his phone. Then, without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket and bolted for the exit. Rachel's voice was barely above a whisper. He knew exactly where to look. Alyssa's fingers curled into fists. This wasn't random. Jeremy hadn't just stumbled upon those codes. He had been planning this. And now? He was gone. Alyssa turned to the guards. Where's the nearest exit? The guard pointed to the side door, the one employees used for breaks. That's where he left. Alyssa moved. She rushed through the store, pushing past racks of clothes, past stunned employees, past Ethan Royce, who was now watching with amusement. Trouble, CEO? He called after her. Alyssa ignored him. She shoved the side door open, stepping out into the alley behind the store. And then, she saw him. Jeremy, 50 feet away, running. And in his hand, a black duffel bag. Alyssa's pulse spiked. Oh, hell no. She didn't think. She ran. Her feet pounded against the pavement as she tore after him. Jeremy glanced back. His eyes went wide. Then, he ran faster. Alyssa wasn't letting him go. Not today. Jeremy, she shouted. He didn't stop. She pushed harder, sprinting faster than she had in years. She didn't care that she was the CEO of a multimillion-dollar company running through a filthy alley. She didn't care that her legs burned. All she cared about was catching him. Jeremy darted around the corner. Alyssa followed. He tried to dodge through a narrow street, but she was gaining on him. Then, he made a mistake. His foot slipped on a wet patch of pavement, and he went down, hard. Alyssa didn't slow. She lunged forward, grabbing the duffel bag before he could react. Jeremy scrambled to his feet. Give that back. Alyssa's breath was ragged. She tightened her grip on the bag. No. Jeremy's face twisted. He lunged for it, but before he could grab it, a car screeched to a stop beside them. A black SUV. The door swung open, and a man stepped out, tall, dressed in all black. Jeremy froze. Alyssa's heart slammed against her ribs, because she didn't know who this man was. But Jeremy did, and the fear in his eyes told her everything. The man didn't speak. He just looked at Jeremy, and Jeremy started shaking. Alyssa's fingers tightened on the bag. Something was very, very wrong. Then, the man took a step forward, and in a low, cold voice, he said, "Hand it over." Alyssa's grip on the duffel bag tightened. The man in black stood perfectly still, his cold gaze locked on her. He wasn't just waiting. He was expecting her to obey, to hand over the bag, to walk away. But Alyssa Grant didn't take orders. Not from a stranger. Not from anyone. Jeremy, however, was shaking like a leaf. He has it, he stammered, pointing at Alyssa. She took it. The man's head tilted slightly, his dark eyes settling back on her. Calculating. Unbothered. Alyssa's pulse pounded. She didn't know who he was, but one thing was clear. Jeremy was terrified of him. And that meant this wasn't just about theft anymore. There was something bigger at play. Alyssa straightened her back. Who are you? The man's expression didn't change. The bag. Alyssa glanced at Jeremy, who looked like he wanted to vanish into thin air. I'm not giving you anything, Alyssa said firmly. The man exhaled through his nose, as if she were being annoying. Then, he reached into his jacket. Alyssa stiffened. Was he armed? Before she could react, another sound cut through the tension. Tires screeching. Alyssa's head snapped toward the street. Another car was racing toward them. A police car. Jeremy's face went ghostly white. The man in black's expression barely shifted, but Alyssa saw the smallest flicker of annoyance. Then, he moved. Fast. Before Alyssa could even process it, he turned sharply, yanked open the SUV door, and slipped inside. The vehicle peeled out of the alley, tires screeching against the pavement. Gone. Alyssa barely had time to breathe before. Freeze. She turned back just as the police car skidded to a stop. Two officers jumped out, hands on their weapons. Jeremy? He did the stupidest thing possible. He ran. Or at least, he tried to. One of the officers tackled him in seconds, slamming him to the ground. Got him, the officer shouted. Jeremy screamed in protest. I didn't do anything. Alyssa's chest heaved. The tension, the chase, the mystery man. It was all hitting her at once. The second officer, an older man with sharp eyes, approached her. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Alyssa nodded, trying to steady her breath. I think so." His gaze dropped to the duffel bag still clutched in her hand. "What's in there?" he asked. Alyssa swallowed hard. "I don't know," she admitted. The officer gestured. "Let's find out." She hesitated, but then, slowly, she crouched down and unzipped the bag. The moment she saw what was inside, her blood ran cold. Inside the bag, stacks of cash, bundles and bundles of money, and tucked between them, Alyssa's own company documents, signed contracts, confidential files, things that should have never left corporate headquarters. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't just theft. This was corporate sabotage. The officer's expression darkened. Where did this come from? Alyssa's mind spun. Before she could answer, Jeremy shouted from the ground. "I don't know anything." His voice was panicked now. "I swear. They made me do it." Alyssa froze. The officers did, too. The older cop narrowed his eyes. "Who made you?" Jeremy shook his head frantically. "I can't say. They'll—" Before he could finish, a loud crack split through the air. Alyssa's heart jumped into her throat. It took her a second to register what just happened. Jeremy's body jerked violently, then went still. Blood began to pool beneath him. A gunshot. Someone shot him. The officers spun around, weapons drawn. Alyssa's breath hitched. She whipped her head toward the rooftops. And there, far above, on the edge of the building, a shadowy figure stood. A sniper. Alyssa's blood ran ice cold. Jeremy was never supposed to talk. And now, he never would. The sniper disappeared into the darkness. And just like that, Alyssa knew. She wasn't dealing with a simple employee scandal anymore. This was bigger. Much bigger. And now, she was right in the middle of it. The moment Jeremy's body hit the pavement, chaos erupted. Shots fired. One of the officers shouted into his radio. The other officer dropped to Jeremy's side, pressing a hand to his bleeding wound. "Stay with me, kid," he barked. "We need a medic now." But Alyssa? She couldn't move. Her ears rang from the gunshot. Her chest was tight. Her mind spun. Jeremy was dead. She knew it before the officer even checked for a pulse. And the shooter? Gone. She tore her eyes from Jeremy's lifeless body, whipping her head toward the rooftop, but the sniper had already vanished. Whoever they were, they hadn't missed. Jeremy was a loose end, and they had eliminated him. Alyssa's stomach turned. Who the hell had he been working for? She didn't have time to process. A hand grabbed her arm. "Ma'am, we need to get you inside." It was the older officer, his voice firm, his face hard. Protective. Alyssa shook her head. "No, I need to." Another shot rang out. This time, it wasn't aimed at Jeremy. It was aimed at her. Alyssa barely registered what was happening before the officer shoved her to the ground. A bullet struck the pavement inches from where she had been standing. "Move," the officer roared. Another gunshot. Too close. Alyssa's survival instincts kicked in. She scrambled to her feet and ran. The officers ran with her, dragging her back toward the store. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This wasn't just a robbery. This wasn't just corporate theft. Someone wanted her dead. The realization sent a chill down her spine. She barely made it through the back entrance before the officers slammed the door shut behind her. "Lock it down." One of them barked into his radio. "Shooter is still active. Get units in position now." The security team inside the store rushed into action, moving employees and customers to safety. Rachel ran toward her, frantic. "What happened?" "We heard gunshots." Alyssa's breath was ragged. She still had the duffel bag clutched in her hands. She could barely speak. "Jeremy's dead," she finally managed. "They shot him." Rachel gasped. "What? Who?" Alyssa's eyes snapped to her. "That's what I need to find out." Rachel's face drained of color. The officers spoke urgently into their radios, trying to track the shooter. But Alyssa already knew. They were gone. Whoever was behind this, they were professionals. She turned to Rachel. "Where's Ethan?" Rachel blinked. "The reporter? He's still out front." Why? Alyssa gritted her teeth. Because Ethan Royce had been watching everything. And right now, she needed answers. She stormed toward the front of the store, ignoring the way her hands shook. She had barely stepped into the main floor when she spotted him. Ethan Royce stood near the entrance, watching the security team lock the doors. His expression? Unbothered. As if people didn't just get shot. As if this was all just another story to him. Alyssa marched straight for him. You knew. Ethan glanced at her, arching an eyebrow. Excuse me? You knew something was off, she accused. That's why you were here before this even happened. Ethan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Alyssa, you're emotional. Take a breath. Her hands curled into fists. Do not patronize me. People are dead. Ethan's smirk faded. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked serious. Then, he leaned in slightly. That's why I'm here. Alyssa's pulse spiked. What does that mean? Ethan lowered his voice. I got a tip. Before you even walked into this store. Alyssa's blood ran cold. What kind of tip? She demanded. Ethan glanced around, making sure no one was listening. Then, he met her gaze. Someone, he said, inside your company is moving money. And they don't want anyone to find out. Alyssa's stomach dropped. She thought this was about one bad employee. But now, this was bigger than her store. Bigger than Jeremy. This was a conspiracy. Ethan continued, his voice dangerously calm. And now, he said, they just killed someone to keep it quiet. Alyssa's breath hitched. Because deep down, she knew. She was next. Alyssa's blood turned to ice. Inside her company, someone was moving money. And now, people were dying to keep it quiet. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Ethan, she said, her voice low, you need to tell me everything you know. Ethan exhaled, rubbing his jaw. I don't have all the details yet. But someone, high up, has been funneling money through Grant Lux stores. A lot of money. Alyssa's stomach twisted. Her company was worth billions. If someone was using her stores to launder money, it wouldn't be pocket change. This was organized. This was planned. And now, Jeremy was dead because he had been caught up in it. Alyssa gritted her teeth. Someone inside Grant Lux wasn't just corrupt. They were dangerous. Who tipped you off? She demanded. Ethan hesitated. Can't say. Alyssa glared. People are getting murdered, and you want to play games? Ethan studied her, then sighed. Fine. My source works in corporate. Said something didn't add up in the financial reports. Alyssa's mind spun. Corporate. That meant this wasn't just some random scheme. It was deep. Someone with access to the company's financials was in on it. And now, they were eliminating loose ends. Her hands clenched into fists. She had built Grant Lux from nothing. Blood, sweat, and sacrifice. And now, someone was using it for crime. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to think. Do you have any names? She asked. Ethan hesitated. Then, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad. He flipped to a page and tapped it. Just one. And it's not a name I expected. Alyssa's heart pounded. She stepped closer, reading the name on the page. And when she saw it, her breath caught. Victoria Langston, her second in command. The woman who had just warned her to stay out of this. Alyssa's chest tightened. Victoria was involved? Ethan watched her carefully. I take it that name means something to you. Alyssa's mind raced. Victoria had been with Grant Lux since the early days. She was powerful, ruthless, but loyal. Or so Alyssa had thought. But now? Now, she wasn't so sure. Alyssa snapped the notepad shut. I need to go. Ethan frowned. Where? She didn't answer. Because she already knew where she had to go. She had to confront Victoria. Now. 20 minutes later, Alyssa stood outside Victoria's penthouse. She had never felt this kind of anger before. If Victoria was involved in this, if she had been lying to her this entire time, then she was going to answer for it. Alyssa pounded on the door. Silence. She knocked again. Harder. Victoria. Open the door. Still nothing. Alyssa's stomach churned. Something felt off. She reached for the doorknob and twisted. It was unlocked. That's when her pulse spiked. She pushed the door open and immediately smelled it. The metallic scent of blood. Her entire body stiffened. She stepped inside, heart racing, and then she saw her, Victoria Langston, slumped over her desk, blood pooling beneath her. A single gunshot wound to the head. Alyssa's breath hitched. No, 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 no. She took a shaky step forward, her hands trembling. This wasn't happening. She had just seen Victoria hours ago. And now? She was dead. Alyssa's vision blurred as the reality crashed down on her. And then, her eyes landed on something else. A piece of paper, lying on the desk, just inches from Victoria's lifeless hand. Alyssa reached out, her fingers cold as ice. She picked it up, unfolded it, and when she read the message written in bold red ink, her entire world tilted. Stop digging. Alyssa staggered back. Her blood turned to stone. This wasn't a suicide. This was a warning. And now? Alyssa Grant was next. Alyssa's hands trembled as she clutched the note. Stop digging. The words were written in bold, red ink, not with a pen, but a thick, heavy marker. Messy, rushed. Her heart pounded. Victoria was murdered. Someone had staged this, and the killer had left a message just for her. Her mind raced. Whoever was behind this, whoever was pulling the strings, had just taken out the second most powerful person at Grant Lux. Victoria knew something. Victoria was a threat. And now? She was eliminated. Alyssa felt sick. She had come here to confront Victoria. Instead, she found a corpse. And the worst part? The killer could still be inside the penthouse. Alyssa's body went rigid. She whipped her head around, scanning the dimly lit apartment. Silence. But the hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. Alyssa forced herself to breathe. She had two choices, run or fight. And Alyssa Grant never ran. Her eyes darted to the kitchen. Knives. A weapon. But just as she took a step toward it, a floorboard creaked behind her. Alyssa spun around. A shadow moved in the hallway. Her pulse spiked. Someone was here. She backed up, gripping the note tighter. Who's there? She demanded. No answer. The shadow shifted again, closer this time. Then, a voice. Low, calm, dangerous. You should have left this alone, Ms. Grant. Alyssa's breath hitched. The figure stepped forward, just enough for the dim light to catch his face. Tall, dark suit. The same man from the alley. The one Jeremy had been terrified of. Alyssa's stomach turned to stone. You, she whispered. His lips curled slightly. I warned you. Alyssa's mind raced. He was here, inside Victoria's penthouse, which meant he killed her. And now? He was going to kill her, too. She didn't hesitate. Alyssa spun on her heel and ran. Straight for the kitchen. Straight for the knives. The man moved fast. But so did she. She grabbed the largest knife she could find and turned just as he reached her. He lunged. She swung. The blade sliced through the air, barely missing him as he dodged. Alyssa's chest heaved. She wasn't a fighter. She had never been in a situation like this. But if this man thought she was just going to roll over and die, he was dead wrong. The man sighed, almost amused. You're making this difficult. Alyssa tightened her grip. Good. He moved again, faster this time. He grabbed her wrist, twisting hard. Alyssa gritted her teeth, refusing to let go of the knife. She kicked out, catching him in the shin. It barely fazed him. He yanked her forward, slamming her against the counter. Alyssa gasped. The impact knocked the wind out of her. Her fingers went numb. The knife clattered to the floor. The man leaned in, voice calm, controlled. This is your last warning, he murmured. Walk away. Drop this. Or next time I won't miss. Alyssa's heart thundered. She was trapped, helpless. But then, a loud crash erupted from the doorway. The man's head snapped up. And suddenly, Ethan Royce was standing in the entrance, gun drawn. Alyssa's eyes widened. The man in black cursed under his breath. Ethan's expression was stone cold. Let her go. The man's grip on Alyssa tightened. Ethan cocked the gun. I won't ask again. The man's jaw ticked. Then, in a blink, he shoved Alyssa away and ran. Ethan fired. Once, twice. Missed. The man disappeared through the back hallway, vanishing into the shadows. Ethan lowered his gun, breathing hard. Alyssa stumbled forward, gripping the counter. Her entire body shook. Ethan turned to her, his gaze sharp. "Are you hurt?" Alyssa squeezed her eyes shut. She wasn't sure how to answer that. Her hands were still shaking. Her heart felt like it was about to explode. But she was alive. Barely. She sucked in a breath and looked up. "Ethan," she whispered, voice hoarse. "I think I just found out who's behind this." Ethan's eyes darkened. "Who?" Alyssa slowly turned toward Victoria's dead body. She gestured to the note in her trembling fingers. Ethan stepped forward, reading it. His jaw tightened. "Stop digging," he muttered. Alyssa met his gaze. "They know I'm on to them." Ethan exhaled. "Then we're running out of time." Alyssa's mind spun. Victoria had been murdered. Jeremy had been silenced. And the man in black? He had given her a choice. Walk away or die. But Alyssa Grant? She didn't take orders. She was going to find out who was behind this. And when she did, she was going to burn them to the ground. Alyssa had never felt fear like this before. Not when she built Grant Lux from the ground up. Not when she stood in boardrooms full of powerful men who underestimated her. Not when she walked into her own store, Undercover, and realized something was very, very wrong. But now, she knew what it felt like to be hunted. Victoria was dead. Jeremy was dead. And if she didn't move fast, she would be next. She looked at Ethan, her pulse racing. "We need to get out of here." Ethan nodded once, tucking his gun back into his jacket. "Agreed. But we need a plan." Alyssa's mind raced. If Victoria was involved, there has to be proof somewhere. Something that ties this all together. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "And you think she kept records?" Alyssa gestured to the penthouse. She was too powerful to play blind. If she was part of this, she knew the risks. Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Which means she was keeping insurance." Alyssa nodded. "And we're going to find it." They moved fast. While Ethan kept watch at the door, Alyssa searched. Desk drawers, locked. Laptop, password protected. Safe, untouched. Her chest tightened. If Victoria had been keeping evidence, it had to be somewhere. Then, her eyes landed on something small, barely noticeable. A book. A plain, leather-bound journal sitting neatly on the bookshelf. Alyssa snatched it. Flipping it open, she scanned the pages, and her breath caught. Numbers, dates, transactions, and at the top of the latest entry, a name, one that made her stomach drop. G. Langston. Her hand froze. Langston. As in Victoria Langston? No. Her gut twisted. Not Victoria. Not her second in command. But her brother. Gregory Langston. Alyssa had barely heard the name in years. He had been ousted from the company long ago after trying to steal from the brand. Disgraced. Exiled. But now, he was back, and he was the one pulling the strings. Alyssa's hands shook. She looked up at Ethan, voice barely a whisper. "I know who's behind this." Ethan stepped closer. "Who?" She swallowed hard. "Victoria's brother." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Where is he now?" Alyssa's stomach churned. "If he's smart, he's watching, waiting." Then, as if the universe heard her words, the lights in the penthouse flickered, and a second later, the whole place went dark. "Move!" Ethan shouted. Alyssa spun around, heart hammering. The penthouse was pitch black, but she felt it. A presence. Someone was here. And then, a voice. Low, amused, cold. "You should have walked away, Alyssa." Her blood ran cold. Gregory. He was here. The light snapped back on, and there he was, standing in the doorway, dressed in an expensive gray suit, dark hair slicked back. Gregory Langston looked every bit the ruthless man she remembered. His eyes gleamed with something dangerous. Alyssa's hands clenched. "You killed your sister." Gregory smirked. "She was weak." Alyssa's chest tightened. "She was your family." Gregory shrugged. "She made the mistake of doubting me." Alyssa's stomach turned. Ethan stepped forward, gun raised. "This ends now, Langston." Gregory tilted his head. "You think you're going to stop me?" Ethan's finger twitched on the trigger. "I don't think. I know." Gregory let out a low laugh. "Then you should know." He snapped his fingers. And a second later, the sound of footsteps filled the hallway. More men. Alyssa's breath caught. They were surrounded. Gregory's smirk widened. You walked into my trap, dear sister. Alyssa stiffened. I'm not your sister. Gregory's eyes darkened. No, you're not. But you are a problem. Alyssa's mind raced. Gregory didn't care about Grant Lux. He cared about power, money, control. And now? He wanted her gone. Ethan's jaw clenched. Alyssa, we need to. Before he could finish, Gregory lifted a gun, pointed directly at her. Alyssa's heart slammed against her ribs. She had seconds to act. She did the only thing she could. She moved. Fast. Ducking just as Gregory fired. The bullet missed her by inches. Ethan returned fire. The room exploded into chaos. Men rushed in. Ethan grabbed Alyssa's wrist, pulling her toward the emergency exit. Gio, he barked. Alyssa ran. They burst out onto the rooftop. The city lights glowed below. Alyssa skidded to a stop. We're trapped. Ethan turned, reloading his gun. Not yet. The rooftop door slammed open. Gregory stepped out. Alone. Smirking. No more running, Alyssa. Alyssa stared at him. And then? She smiled. Gregory's smirk faded. What? A whirring sound filled the air. Alyssa looked up, just as a black helicopter descended from above. Gregory's face twisted in rage. You. Ethan smirked. I called in a favor. The spotlight hit them. The police had arrived. Gregory whirled around. Just as red sniper dots landed on his chest, a voice boomed through the speakers. Gregory Langston. Hands up. Alyssa watched as realization dawned on his face. He had lost. Gregory raised his hands. Ethan let out a relieved breath. Told you it would work. Alyssa exhaled, heart still pounding. It was over. Gregory was going to prison. And Grant Lux? She was going to fix everything. She looked at Ethan. Drinks after this? Ethan chuckled. You just survived a hitman, a conspiracy, and a rooftop standoff. And you want a drink? Alyssa smirked. Always. Ethan shook his head. You're insane. She laughed. You have no idea. As the helicopter landed, Alyssa knew one thing for sure. She had walked into her store as an undercover CEO and walked out as a woman who took down a criminal empire. And now? She was just getting started.